Frolic and Brine, reviews be thine. Let's talk about Ring.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, do you want to let the people know what we're here to discuss today?
So, this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week, we are continuing with our annual Halloween conversations. This week, we are talking about Ring, which is a 1998 Japanese horror movie about a journalist who discovers that deaths among local teenagers are linked to a mysterious videotape. And it turns out that anybody who watches this tape dies under mysterious circumstances a week later. And she then goes on to investigate the origins of this tape, and a mystery unravels from there. So, Ring is one of those classic movies that made film history back in the day. Like in 1998, it just came out and was one of the most successful Japanese movies during that time, and it really drew attention to Japanese horror movies. So I've seen it a few times now. Not a huge expert on it, but I've seen it a few times. And you just saw it for the first time, right?
Yep, correct.
So what did you think of The Ring watching it for the first time in 2025?
It was a little bit boring. I will say. Not that scary. Not too much horror around it. I mean, definitely some good tense moments, tension building moments in there, especially at the start when we're introduced to, the two young girls that are telling the story about this particular video that they watch and like kind of like the lore behind it and stuff. But it wasn't really that scary or that much horror element to it. We are just kind of following these characters on this discovery of like what happened to the girl who eventually is the girl that's in the Ring video, essentially. So, and that's not to say that it's like a bad movie. I think it's like a perfectly fine movie, but it just didn't. And probably for its time, thinking back to like watching this in the 80s, probably would have been a little bit more creepier or a little bit more scary than how I'm receiving it in 2025. And we've kind of seen different iterations of things like this. Like I've seen the remake of The Ring when I was younger, and I've seen other horror movies as well. So that was a little bit of a letdown because I know, yourself and other people have like held this one as like in higher regard to the original kind of like American version of it. So I was looking forward to it, but I just felt like that horror element was missing. It was, I don't know, I was a little bit confused and it was a little bit kind of like frustrating, just kind of like watching it where you had, this like psychic character that's just kind of knows everything, or it's just kind of like immediately getting everything that happened to this particular girl, or like he's just like every kind of every moment he's just like picking up more cues as to what happened, who was involved, who this person was, and what happened, and it just kind of felt a little bit random. It just kind of felt like there wasn't really any narrative reason for why they were just uncovering it. It was just like he got a vision or he like saw something and he got it. And then I was also confused as to why, if by the end of the movie, and I don't know how they come to the conclusion, but she comes to the conclusion that she wasn't cursed anymore because she passed it on to him by making him watch the movie. Like, my confusion comes from why was she also being haunted still? In terms of like, the little girl that like puts her hand on her wrist and you see the black mark and that eventually goes away after they go into the well, and why she even like has that like moment of like when she's in the well and like the little girl comes out and like grabs her by the wrist and stuff like that. I don't know. It was just a bit. I was a bit confused as to why she would still experience it if she passed on the curse to someone else and was no longer cursed herself. I mean, the angle of her and like working with her ex-husband and like her child seeing it and like them kind of being desperate to find an answer to what had gone on. I think it was cool. I think it was like serviceable in this particular movie. We complained about Tron Ares in another video about how it played like a little bit fast and loose with time with the 29 minutes it gave for the AI creations to kind of get about the city and do what they needed to do. But here, like when they did the boat trip, they went onto the island and stuff like that, and you're seeing like it's actually taking you out a whole day, and the characters have to wrestle with the idea of they need to make this journey, but there's a risk that they're losing time, and like it has to be worthwhile and stuff like that. So I appreciate the movie for that, and kind of making you feel the weight behind the decisions that they were making, and the choices they had to make. So yeah, overall, it's not a bad movie. It's just maybe a little bit disappointing considering how hyped up it was, or how I perceived the hype to be around this particular movie.
Yeah, that's some interesting points you made there, and I think I agree with about half of them. So one of the things, so first of all, I agree that it's not that scary. There's not a ghost running around, chasing people. Nobody's walking down dark hallways being scared. You can argue whether there's any jump scares in this, but for the most part, it's a very slow, sedate, relaxed movie, right? And it's more this ticking, like the entire movie is driven by this ticking clock, and a week is quite a bit of time, but there's this constant pressure on the characters to keep moving forward, right? And to keep investigating the mystery. And there's a few things I agree with you about. One of them is it's more mystery than a horror in the way we know it. But I do think uncovering this repressed or suppressed past that has led to this ghost doing what she does is the horror. Like it's not just the threat of being killed, and it is not just the creepy girl crawling out of the TV to kill people, or the gruesome condition that its victim or her victims are found in. Like, I think all of that is creepy and scary, but the movie as a whole is very much like an investigation. It's almost like a crime drama in terms of how it feels. And in that way, I would actually compare it to The Exorcist in more ways than one. One of them is that this is a very famous movie, and I think unlike The Exorcist, a lot of people have seen this. Like, if you are into horror, you probably see this before you see The Exorcist, because The Exorcist is kind of this old stuffy thing, and this is, I think, more modern and more. I think at least my view has always been that it feels more approachable, because it's just like a movie from the 90s that is supposed to be really scary. And we all know the image of the phone ringing and the 7 days. Maybe we've seen the American remake. We know the image of the creepy girl with the long black hair that comes out of the well. This might be completely off base, but I have a feeling that, like, the Ring, like, more people have seen the Ring than they've seen the Exorcist. But one of the things it has in common is that people have, I think, a different idea of what this is like, because this is not the ghost stalking people for 2 hours, right? In the same way that the Exorcist is not really about the exorcism, or at least the bulk of the movie is about other things. And also, it's shot in a very matter of fact style, right? Where it looks like just any other movie, right? And it looks very real, and it looks very grounded, and this looks like our world. And I think that is something that those two movies have in common. And also, that is part of why it works, because the weird thing, like the haunted videotape and the ghost that comes out of the TV, that's kind of the crazy part of this whole thing. And that feels more believable because the rest of the movie is so believable, in my opinion.
I think so, yeah, actually, because I didn't ever like question the girl, or I didn't ever question the powers behind it, because again, even with like the psychic abilities, because like everything felt so grounded and it just kind of felt like part of the world, you kind of just accept it and you don't really question it, and you just feel like, this, okay, this is this kind of like the state that that their sort of particular universe is in. I do feel like the groundedness definitely helped with making the Ring aspect and, like, her a little bit more believable. I do wish we did see her a little bit more than what we did in this particular movie, just to add to that level of, and I know, like you mentioned, like the horror is uncovering what happened to her, but it would have helped a little bit more to kind of like understand a little bit more about her abilities, and like why, in that report room she was able to like easily like just kill that reporter, basically, who was like kind of like questioning if it was all a hoax. The mother being able to match the writing of the other people that were in the room. I can't remember what they were, but I don't know, it just would have been nicer to kind of get a little bit more understanding of like her, like Sadako, and her like abilities, and like why she was able to actually kill people. It's essentially, if you kind of get what I'm saying, there was like an element of that missing, of like we're spending a lot of time uncovering her story and uncovering what happened to the real her, but not enough on the actual abilities and what she was able to do, and why she was able to do it. Unless I missed something, but yeah.
I think there's a lot of detail in this, and I'm not sure I've gotten all of it, because there's just a lot of little details, little offhand comments that characters make. I do think part of this is the cultural barrier, because, like, this image of the ghost girl with the long black hair, that ties into Japanese folklore, which I don't really know, and I can summarize the Wikipedia article on it. But if you want to get into that, look up the Yurai, which is apparently vengeful spirits, which often appear in a similar form as Sanako does in this. So, like, I think there's a lot of shorthand in this that maybe the Japanese audiences would get more in terms of what Sadako is able to do and why. That is kind of just something you have to roll with. And I'm not sure the story would have been stronger if we get like a detailed breakdown of what it is she can do, or like a systematic explanation of what her powers actually are. Because I think there's a bunch of things in here that are not intuitive at all, and I want to get into that in a minute. Like specifically the videotape and the phone, and like that, those seem all a little bit disconnected and a little bit random. And I think in a different movie, in a worse movie, I would criticize them for being unmotivated. But I actually do think there's a motive behind this. But just to wrap up this specific topic, even after encountering the movie and seeing what it was offering, you just didn't really get on board with it. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say I didn't get on board with it because I was like I feel like I was like halfway there. More so out of like genuine interest of the ring and actually seeing the original compared to the American version that I had watched. But I wasn't all the way there just because there just wasn't enough happening, or like there wasn't enough kind of horror elements to it per se. And that's not to say that I kind of wanted the jump scares or like the fights and stuff like that. But they could have built like a creepier or more tense atmosphere in certain situations. Is probably where I would go with, because again, like I described, like at the very start of the movie, when you have the two girls that are doing like the sleepover, and one's telling the story and playing the trick on the other, but then the other one then like plays the trick back on her. I feel like that was like a really good like tense building moment. You kind of really feel the tension and uncomfortable in that situation, and then of course the phone rings and stuff. And I feel like they do a really good job of building tension in that opening scene. And another creepy moment where like they create a good creepy atmosphere is in the video itself, in sort of kind of like the visuals that they put in there, especially when they kind of like go back and they're coming through it and they're like watching it at a slower pace, and you're seeing like the changes in the face and stuff like that, and facial expressions. I feel like there's little nuggets of it here and there where they build up good tension or good creepy moments or get good atmosphere, but it's very few and far.
What about the investigation itself? Because there's kind of the bulk of the movie itself, right? Where Reiko and Ryuji go on this scavenger hunt where they follow the clues and they eventually track down Sadako's story, and it all kind of comes together, accepting that it's not a standard ghost story the way you expected. How did that part come across?
I mean, I was definitely interested to understand the background and the backstory behind the videotape, who the girl was. There's always like something tragic that happened in it, and then it has to be uncovered. I don't think I loved the fact that we had a psychic that just kind of was able to kind of like have visions and see stuff and see the past, etc. I feel like there could have been more real world clues or real world physical books or pictures or stuff like that that they could have used to like really uncover and put together the pieces, as opposed to like grabbing someone and then like having a flashback of them being in a particular room with someone. So I think I'm like half and half. I feel like I was on board with it because I was also curious on my side, and I just wanted to know what happened. But I think that's more so liking the concept of the video and the girl in the video, as opposed to the movie doing a good job of hooking me onto these characters' journeys and finding out why these things happen because of the characters in the movie.
Yeah, I think I broadly agree with that. Like, I think like I'm totally on board with just the movie being an investigation and people digging into the past of what happened. But I do think a lot of it relies way too much on coincidence. So one of them is that in the very beginning, when Reiko first hears about the murders, she kind of randomly, for no apparent reason, grabs a newspaper from the desk, right in the newspaper office, and she flips through it and lands exactly on the article about these killings, and that has exactly the clues she needs to get to the next step. And then another one is when they go to the island, right, where Sadako used to live. And then they go to this inn, and there they happen to find her uncle, who just happens to run it and who reveals himself as being linked to Sadako. Like, they don't track him down, they don't follow clues, they don't figure anything out. He kind of just appears. And then he's just there to give some exposition and explain why people hated Sadako, right? 40 years, 50 years earlier.
It's actually funny. I actually rewinded on that particular because I felt like I missed something, like as to why they found
Mhm.
this guy and why he was like, so relevant. Because again, it felt completely random. So I actually rewinded that particular scene and was like, okay, how do we get here? Watched it again, and I was like, oh no, he just appeared, like they're like being shown the room and he just appears and they happen to know him and he happens to be linked to the girl, and that was a little bit disappointing. But I'll let you continue.
Another part of that is when they get to the inn and they walk past the like they're being shown to the room and they just stop and walk into a random room and it's the one that appears in the video, right, where the mirror is exactly in the location. And I don't believe there was a way for them to know. Like, I don't think, like, the clue is the mirror. And I think they walk into a closed room and then there's the mirror 40, 50 years later that looks like it. And they said, aha, this is the room. And that kind of kicks off, I think, the uncle being revealed because he has a reaction to it when they start asking questions. But it does seem like a complete coincidence. So that is a little bit of a shame, I think, where I think the mystery part should follow a little bit. Like, it feels so unearned, and it doesn't feel like an accomplishment by the main characters, right? Because it kind of happens, right? And I think if I had to criticize anything about this movie, and I don't remember the American remake well enough, I saw it a few years ago. If the remake fixes that issue, I don't think it does, but I think that's a real flaw in the story.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got to a point where I did feel like they accomplished anything really. Because like even when they got to the well, and remind me because it's been maybe like a day or so since I watched it. But when they got to the well and they were taking the water out of the well, I was a little bit confused as to why they were doing that.
They were draining the well in order to get to Sadako's body
Right. Okay.
because she got locked in the well and died there and is haunting it essentially. And they're trying to find her remains, which they do. But that is why they're draining it.
And remind me, did they have a reason for why they wanted to find it? Like what was like the ultimate goal that they thought would lift the curse? Because it again at the very end of the movie, it's like you can only lift the curse from yourself if you show someone else the video, and then it becomes a never-ending cycle, which I don't understand. Because if one person watches it, dies without showing it to someone else, then and no one finds the tape, then cycle ends there. But if it's a never-ending cycle of like you show people the video and you're passing the curse on to other people. What were they trying to achieve up until that point to kind of lift the curse off them? Because again, it's a race against time, and there has to be something for them to be able to win or achieve before time runs out, so that the curse is lifted off them. But it didn't really seem like there was something solid there that would for sure lift the curse.
So I don't know that they know about the curse being transferred by making a copy. Reiko figures it out in the end in a voiceover, right? So it's again a little bit convenient. I think they don't have a very specific plan in terms of what to do when they find Sadako. It's more like if they find her, they will figure something out. And they have to find her for the next step. And there's also this aspect of her psychic ability is limited in distance. And the fact that this hostel or this cottage is where the haunted tape appears kind of suggests that it's close to where she is. And that's how they find the well. And that is kind of how they find her. And I think the idea is basically, I'm not entirely sure how it is in Japanese folklore. In Western folklore, you need to either put the body to rest or you need to redress the grievance that is keeping the ghost from moving on. And in Japanese folklore, it might be different. But that is kind of what they were getting at, this whole, like, if we bring the truth to this, or if we, maybe bury Sadako or something like this. I think that is kind of what they had in mind. And then at first, it looks like this succeeds when Sadako kind of attacks them and Reiko just hugs her, kind of saying, it's okay, I understand you, I'm here to help you, that kind of thing. At that point, it looks like the curse is lifted, right? And then it turns out it's not when Ryoji is killed anyway. But I think that is kind of what's going on there.
That's fair, and I think it's probably important to know kind of that there are these cultural differences, and there are these like cultural nuances that, especially from a movie from 1980s Japan, where I can't imagine this was made for an international audience, so there would probably be a lot of like cultural things that are relevant to Japan in there. So yeah. Yeah, again, looking at it as an outsider looking in, some things are like very confusing. It doesn't make sense, but I can imagine they do make sense to someone that's a little bit more in the know.
Yeah, and this might be so basic that the movie doesn't feel it needs to explain it, but you have to know the folklore probably. But I'm not sure about that. It could be that they just said, well, this is our only option anyway, so let's do it. And what else are we going to do? That's also possible. So now that we've spent 20 minutes trashing the story of this, and I do think Like the story of this needs some improvement. Just the basics of it. And like we haven't mentioned how Ryuji especially is just an exposition machine where he goes off for an hour and comes back with the next clue. It's like it's not completely out of nowhere, but it's always a little bit convenient, right? How he just happens to find out about Sadako and her story and all of, and finds the right newspaper articles and all of this, right? I think that part should, like, if this ever gets remade again, they should maybe overhaul that part a little bit. Just the line of breadcrumbs that the characters go down maybe should feel a little bit more earned, just to be more satisfying. But I do have a list of positive things about all of this. And one of them is that I said earlier that a lot of the pieces of Sadako's MO is kind of random and unmotivated, right? Like, why does she appear on a videotape? Why do people get a phone call? Why does she come out of the TV? Why does she not just simply kill people in the cottage, right? Like, that would be more straightforward. And I think there's a few different aspects here, and there's a whole bunch of interpretations about the movie where people can just read pretty much anything they want into it. And there's also the blurred photos, right? Like, why are photos blurred of the people who have been killed by Sadako? Does not, like, all these pieces don't really seem to come together. But I do think there's like underlying ideas here, and one of them is that, remember, this is from 1998. This is predating the internet and smartphones, and so rumors are much more important. And this idea that you will just find a videotape and anything could be on it, and you might be the only person who's ever going to see it, or it might be like just a handful of people. Like, now you could go on on Reddit or something and talk about any movie you want to talk about, no matter how obscure, because there's enough people who have seen it, and there's no such thing as hidden information anymore. But in 1998, this was different. In 1998, you could walk into a bookstore, into a video store, and just find a gem, just something that is just there and that is not widely available. And I think this is where the VHS comes from. This is just something that is just sitting there, and it's a piece of modern technology that is kind of drifting through the world, through society, and random people find it and they meet their doom because of it. That is kind of a clash between modernity and tradition. So between the rational, technological, modern world and the mystical, mysterious, magical past, right? So the VHS and the phone call and the photos, these are all things that kind of link into modernity, I think, where the random VHS you find and the phone call and the blurred photos weren't digital at the time, right? You made photos and then you brought them to a shop to be delivered, and then days later you picked them up, and that's when you got your photos, right? It was a whole process, right? And this kind of went away with the digital cameras, but at the time you could just find a photo roll and anything could be on it, and you would need to wait days before you found out what was on it. Now, I think that's how these elements all tie together.
But is there, and again, I can kind of accept that theory, but is there any criticism or any kind of like discussion within that? Would you say, like, within the movie itself, in terms of like, because I don't think I got like this whole like tradition versus modernity stuff, even though I can kind of see like how like the modern items in here are sort of like corrupt or have these like sinister things behind them, like, of course, like the phone, and not knowing who you're picking up the phone to, especially at the time. It didn't feel like the movie was trying to make a point, is kind of what I'm saying, though I might have missed it, or like it wasn't like the moral of the story wasn't this whole like tradition versus like modernity stuff, and it's not like how the movie concluded either. So I don't know. Is there like an additional like layer that I'm kind of not seeing here?
There's a little bit more to it, like, and good call about the phone. Like, now you know who's calling you, or at least you know that a stranger is calling you. Back then, if the phone rang, could be anybody, right? So that's one thing. There's more aspects to this. So one of like part of the modernity is that people don't take superstition and tradition seriously, right? Like, we see this in the opening sequence where these two girls think it's a joke, even though they're about to die, right? And they just simply don't believe that anything sinister could be happening. And then weird stuff starts happening, like the phone call and the TV randomly turning on. Things that are supposed to be predictable and understandable and useful are now random and threatening. So that, I think, is part of it. And then that collides with the tradition of the ghost, right? That's coming from the past, right? This is like a psychic remnant of an injustice that happened 50 years ago, but it happened in a modern context, right? This was scientists trying to test a psychic, and it got off the rails. And she killed somebody because they wouldn't accept her powers, and so she killed somebody who was calling her a fraud, and then the entire town turned on her, and and then things kind of unfolded from there, and that ended up with this girl who kind of had inherited the psychic powers from her mother, kind of being locked in a well and dying a gruesome death, and her psychic rage kind of lashing out at people even 50 years later. So I think there's less of a point being made and more of like this whole idea of modernity, progress, and what the world is like what the modern world is like compared to what it used to be, and the two things being connected through Sadako and her powers, right? And then a related point to that is that all of this technology is really, really mundane, right? There's nothing exotic about this. At the time, everybody was watching VHS tapes, everybody had a phone, everybody took pictures of themselves and their friends, and the haunting happening through these items made it relatable. Every time after this, when the phone rang after you watched this, you thought about the movie, right? And as you were watching it, it was like you were like the people this was happening to. And I think that is kind of important as well. So I think that is how these different, seemingly disparate pieces hang together, I think. And I actually have a story about this where back in like 2003 or 4, some of my classmates were watching The Ring, and one of them had arranged a prank where he kind of made sure that where they would start the movie at a certain time, and then his dad was waiting at home, waiting for the right time, and he would then call the house where they were at in order to freak them out. So it's like linked, and it totally did freak them out. The wrong person answered the phone, and then the guy calling, the dad, didn't say anything because it was just supposed to be a prank. And then the person who picked up the phone freaked out and thought a relative was in the hospital or something like that, and that something was wrong, and like it was a whole thing and lasted in the entire evening. So this whole idea of the scary phone call, I don't think like on a real thematic level it really all hangs together. Like it's not a big elaborate metaphor, but it's supposed to make this relatable. It's supposed to make this a matter of every day, and it's supposed to make it mundane. But that is then the inroads for the scary ghost girl that comes out of the TV and drains your life essence because she was tortured for being psychic 50 years ago.
It's actually funny because I think that's probably where like the horror element actually came from for people that probably watched it many years ago when technology wasn't as advanced as we are today with like our smartphones and stuff. But it's funny you say that because the only time I actually felt some type of like real horror in this movie or like felt uncomfortable and felt like, especially being in by myself at the moment, felt like something could really act like imagining if it was real was actually through the TV, and that's like kind of like the one thing that is kind of still the same, has changed, has evolved over time, of course, with like higher resolution, higher definition, etc. But it's kind of still like that one thing that's similar to the past, where you kind of like just like watch something online and like maybe like I've had situations where something comes on or like the TV turns on in a moment where I didn't expect it to turn on. It kind of gives you a little bit of a fright. So that's kind of where I, anyways, felt a little bit more of the anxiety compared to like the phone situation or compared to the cameras or anything else like that. Even though the cameras can kind of still the same, but a little bit different in terms of it being a little bit more digitized now.
Yeah, it all being digital and higher resolution and more ubiquitous, I think makes it really difficult to pull off the same trick again. Like if you try to modernize the story or a story like it, I think it's really, really difficult. And the only example of this I can think of is Incantation. I think like we did that. I think earlier in the year, like 6 months ago or something. And I think we like you didn't join for that conversation, but did you end up watching the movie?
No, I didn't. Didn't ring a
Taiwanese
bell.
horror movie. It's very similar to this, and it's also about spreading a curse, and video has a role to play in it, and tradition colliding with modernity, and modern people not taking the superstitions of their ancestors seriously, and all of that. Like I would be very surprised if Ring wasn't a major influence on Incantation. I think it's very difficult to kind of translate this kind of mystery of technology into a world in which we are constantly surrounded by technology that is always on, that is very transparent, that is very locked down and very predictable. Back in the day, if you turned on your TV, anything could be on there, right? And you switch to a channel and you have no idea, like unless you memorize the channels. But if you like like if you used a TV that you weren't used to, if as you flip through the channels, you had zero clue what was going to come up next. And there was a certain, and like with the phone not having caller ID and stuff like that, not showing the name of the contact or even the number, there was a certain mystery associated with technology. And that is kind of like a paradox where, on the one hand, it's rational and understood and known and safe, but also it's the vector for the evil presence where you lose control and just reaches out to you and grabs you. So I do think there's something here, but I think you're right. Watching this 27 years later, it's a little bit hard to relate because that is not how we interact with modern technology anymore.
The only kind of way you kind of like modernize it a little bit is through AI a little bit, because that's a little bit more of the unknown that we're relatable, that we can relate to today. You have stuff like Megan actually, which I think worked quite well in this, in the sense of like programming and having an AI where that has a kind of like a mission or a goal, or like a sense of like kind of like programming where their psyche, or like I wouldn't say psyche, but like the whole idea of the like AI is to do this one thing. But then what happens when that's interpreted the wrong way and like it goes a little bit too far? So I think kind of like Megan's an interesting one to look at through a little bit more of a modern lens on it, even though it's not exactly the same thing of like something coming out of TV or stuff like that.
The only problem I have with that is that Megan is very cartoonish and very far removed from everyday experience, like how we interact with technology. I actually just had the idea for a horror movie, which is somebody's talking to ChatGPT, Gemini, one of those. And rather than just spitting back fairly generic text, it actually starts talking to you and actually starts warning you about something, or it starts to try to get you to do something. Something like that, right? I really want to see that movie now, where what if there's an evil AI, but it's not like we've seen in the movies, where it just starts taking over stuff, it starts killing people, but what if it's actually like more like a ghost? Or what if it's kind of the synthesis of every tragic death ever, because that's what it was trained on, or something like that, right? I think that has a lot of potential, and now I want to see that. But I think it has to be like like a piece of technology that we interact with on a daily level that suddenly turns senescence a vector for the evil. And I think AI, the way we use it, is a decent way to do it, because like the regular internet is just so safe and so locked down and so curated, that the only other thing that comes to mind is like random feeds on like TikTok or something like that, where suddenly creepy stuff starts appearing, but it's not creepy because somebody made a creepy video, but because your feed is haunted. You know what I mean? Like I think that could be kind of cool, and I hope that somebody does something like that, because I think that is how you recreate that feeling of technology use every day kind of going wrong in these kinds of ways.
That would actually be a really interesting way to do it, where maybe you scroll across a TikTok page that only has one follower for whatever reason, and it's like a creepy image, and if you don't scroll past it within a certain amount of time, like you kind of like start. I don't know. That would be like a really interesting way to kind of remake something like this. Actually,
Yeah, or it's like a TikTok video of somebody asking for help, but they're specifically asking you for help, and it's got one view and it's only you. Something like that. And every time you scroll away, it keeps coming back. It keeps getting weirder and creepier.
yeah.
I'm freaking myself out a little bit now because I'm in a
No,
dark
literally,
room.
genuinely.
But it's no. I think that's a cool idea. And if any Hollywood executives are listening, I'll send you my bank details. If you send me a message. I just think it's a cool idea, and I think that is the kind of thing that Ring taps into, and that is kind of hard to relate to today. All right, moving on. I've got one more topic in this, and that's an overall theme here. Like, I think that this movie mostly works on a thematic and vibes level, right? Like, just the melancholy of the whole thing and the tragedy of the whole thing, and uncovering this tragic event that is leading to these weird events. And that is about caring, and specifically people caring about each other. So Reiko cares about her son. Reiko and Ryuji are divorced, so there must be a reason for why they're not. together anymore, right? They must have had this big falling out, and they must have decided that they can't be in each other's lives anymore. And also 90s Japan, I don't think divorce was an easy thing. So this must have taken some doing to actually get divorced in like 1988 in Japan, as far as I understand. But he cares about enough about them that he will risk his own life to help her investigate this mystery, right? And he ends up dying because of it, right? So that is ultimately about people caring about each other. Sadako is initially placated by Reiko not running away, not being afraid, but just showing compassion for her. And then we have the lack of compassion from science 50 years ago, where they were doing these tests, and the tests were kind of professional and kind of objective, but they went bad when people had this idea that there was something real about this, and they were freaked out by it, and that ended in two tragic deaths, right? And then journalism is supposed to be like, those are supposed to be the seekers of truth. Like science and journalism, those two institutions are about truth. Right? They're about learning things, about bringing the truth to the forefront for the benefit of people. And both of these institutions in this movie do not care about Sadako or her mother. Like science completely buries the entire thing, and journalism is just there for the story and for the clicks, basically, right? Like they are happy to make this documentary about these dead teenagers, but Reiko is the only one who is actually interested in getting to the bottom of this and preventing more deaths. And the police is completely passive and absent in this as well. So much like Exorcist and Exorcist 3, the drama is driven by the institutions in our lives that we are meant to trust in being the villain or ineffectual or passive or absent. And then in the end, Reiko has tried to be compassionate. She has tried to reach a solution that works for everybody, which kind of involves putting Sadako at rest, right? And it doesn't work. And the only way she can save herself and her son, because Ryuji is already dead at this point, is to spread the curse. And so this entire thing is driven by spite and revenge. First by Sadako, because she was killed under tragic circumstances and the world abandoned her and didn't care about her. And so now she will destroy lives until things get better. And they won't. At one point, Ryuji says something like, journalism has not changed very much in 40 years, indicating like how this initial story was reported and how the new deaths are being reported, indicating that this is not going to change. It doesn't matter how long Sadako is around or how many people she kills. It will not get better. Nobody will care. And so Reiko joins Sadako, essentially, at least takes Sadako's side in this argument that is playing out over the course of the movie, and she becomes an agent of revenge and spreading suffering in order to save herself, in order to have a chance at bettering her position and finding peace for herself, which is exactly the same thing that Sadako has been doing.
It's an interesting theory. You can definitely see the sprinkles of, levels of care. Again, like I think I mentioned that it was like interesting to see, like, despite him being like the ex husband to her, how far he was willing to go and like how much time and effort he was like willing to put into something that was like important to her in that particular moment, which definitely showed a level of care. And of course, you have that scene when she's hugging the skeleton corpse, which again shows a strong level of compassion. I thought at the end that she was gonna show the granddad the tape to sort of take the curse off of her son. Because didn't she ask, is like thing there or something like that, or whatever the case was? But she was like actually like actively like brought her VHS tape, like the tape and the recorder as well, to like when she was on the way to her son at the end of the movie. I wouldn't say that's like compassion. I feel like it's a little bit more false compassion. To be fair, if that was actually the case, where that the grandparent would probably do anything for the kid, but you're kind of like burdening them with something a little bit dark on that front.
This might be a Japanese thing. Remember about 10 years ago, the big nuclear reactor disaster in Fukushima?
No, but I'm sure you'll provide more info.
So basically, there was a tsunami that damaged a nuclear reactor in Fukushima in Japan. And it was a massive disaster, and it took years to clean up. And I think it is cleaned up now, but it was a major thing. And there was an episode in which radiation was leaking from this reactor that had been damaged by the tidal wave. And seniors from Fukushima were lining up to repair the reactor, saying that this radiation will kill us within 10 years, right? Anybody who does this work will die within 10 years from radiation poisoning. But I'm 75, I'm not going to live another 10 years. So I'm going to do this for my children and my grandchildren. And that is a very Japanese thing to do, right? Like stereotypically Japanese, right? It's hard to imagine that happening in Europe and in the West, right? Because there's like this sense that in Japan, this kind of altruism or selflessness is more of a thing. And even though in this case it's completely rational, right? Like if this kills you in 10 years and you have 5 years to live, why would you not do it, right? It's a rational thing. And some people would do it here too, but I think that is a very Japanese attitude. And I think the grandfather would actually volunteer for it because he has lived his life and it's the way to save his daughter and his grandson. I have a feeling if we saw that scene, it would actually be okay with it. I don't think she needs to trap him. Trap him. I don't think this is like Smile, where you have to set people up and trap them and impose the curse on them. I think in a Japanese cultural context, there would actually be people, especially elderly people, who would be okay with being cursed in this way if it has this greater good effect. Which is not to say everybody in Japan is a saint or anything like that or completely selfless, but I have a feeling the response would be likely be different.
Yeah, and I did get that sense as well as I was watching it. I was like, from a Western point of view, it seemed a little bit dark, but it did seem like he'd be quite accepting of it. But what are your thoughts on this whole idea of like this like kind of like never ending cycle of this curse? Because again, it seemed like once someone had died of it, you could kind of just like ignore it unless the like tape had supernatural powers. It did have a level of supernatural powers, but unless it like had some type of way to always like find its way to someone, it just kind of felt like this whole idea of this curse will never end didn't quite make sense because if they like kind of like buried it or like they kind of like became like common knowledge not to watch it or whatever the case was, then you kind of like put a stop to the curse and no one else really gets cursed past that point. I don't know. Obviously, you can't stop everyone from watching it, but it wouldn't be as frequent or as like constant. I don't even think it was as frequent, or I don't know what like the times were between like the schoolgirls that saw it and then like her. It was just like that one line that stuck with me, and I was like, I don't know if I like really believe in this like never ending cycle of like passing it on from one person to another.
So I think because it is linked to the tape, there's the risk of somebody else watching it and then starting the cycle again. Because in 1998, somebody might just pop it into a VHS player and just watch it. And then when they die, it's going to end up being sold, or it's going to end up in some trunk, and then somebody finds it years later. It being analog and it being a physical thing means that it would just keep floating around. And also, Sadako can just make more tapes, I think. Like the tape is like a manifestation of her psychic presence, right? She's imprinting these ideas and that on these tapes, and that is why it has such a symbolic nature, where every image in this is like an emotion that Sadako feels, and like one of the key events that led to her suffering, right? Like the eruption of the volcano and all these different components. So I don't think this is at all about stopping the curse. This is about Reiko saving her son because he has seen the tape, and the only way to save him specifically is for him to make a copy and give it to somebody. And so, in this entire story about caring and caring about others and showing compassion, you have to be cruel to save yourself. And if you don't, you die. And like there's this voiceover, right, where they interview these schoolgirls, right, for this documentary, and they say something like, "Would like if you were put in that position, wouldn't you do the same?" They voiced this idea that people are going to do this, right? Like in order to save themselves, they're going to curse other people, and that means and that is how the curse. Like it's not baked into the curse itself that it can never end. It's about people being selfish in order to save themselves, and I think that's what's going on here.
Fair, fair, yeah.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this works really on a thematic level, and it's less about the mechanics of the curse or the mechanics of Sadako's powers or something like that. And if you approach it that way, I think it's going to be unsatisfying. But it's more about what position is Reiko put in. Is she willing to essentially condemn somebody to the position she's in order to save her son? And that means being selfish. That means being an awful person, but it's the only way to live. You know what I mean? Like I think that's kind of how it goes.
I mean, kind of back to the journalism point as well. It's like you kind of mentioned about how 50 years before with like Sadako and her mother and stuff like that, and how like the people in modern day were like dying, and it was just like not being reported the right way, or it's like, you know, only interested in the sensational side of things. And it then kind of seems harsh to punish the one person that was actually curious about the story and was actually curious to really know what was going on. It doesn't really kind of, I mean, if you kind of like read it, how the movie played out, it doesn't really advocate for, you know, digging deep and finding the real story, because she was only in that position because she went further than she probably needed to really like uncover the real story and uncover what actually had gone on with these tapes, which is a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah, which speaks to the unfairness of it all, right? Like Sadako did not do anything to deserve this either. This is just happening to the wrong people.
Exactly, pretty much. And it kind of ties into the rest of the stuff that we're talking about, where there's just things in here, but the movie isn't really making a strong point. It's just like there's like these like kind of themes and ideas in there, but it's not really making a strong point about like anything here there or the other.
Which I'm okay with. Like it's simply about what position is Reiko put in. That is ultimately what we care about, and that is, I think, that is what works. And all the other pieces are there to make that happen and to support it. And I'm totally okay with that. We are kind of used to kind of these things kind of making a lot of internal sense, and like a bigger, like there being a bigger message and all of that. And I don't think that's this kind of movie, right? Like there's not a clean message of, oh, you should care about people. No, caring about people is what got her into this position in the first place. And now she has to change in order to survive, right? And that is tragic by itself. And we're just watching that happen.
Which is unfortunate. Which is unfortunate.
You might call that a horror.
Even though this isn't necessarily one to the Cinemax, but yeah, I guess. Or it is for those that watched it at the time. I think it's like over time become less of a horror and more of a mystery as things have changed.
Yeah, and I agree that like in terms of how the movie feels, it's more of a mystery. But ultimately, it's kind of like if you empathize, if you care about Reiko, that is where the horror comes from, because you can see yourself in her position and you can imagine what would I do, and the movie outright asks you, wouldn't you do the same? And so I do think it works.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right, to wrap this up, Ring, 1988. Does this go on the shelf? Is this worth rewatching? Is this worth making a copy and sending it to somebody so that they have to show somebody else?
Not quite on the shelf, unfortunately. Not quite on the shelf. It's not bad movie, but I feel like age has defeated this one a little bit in terms of it's kind of like taking away some of the punch and some of the horror behind it. It's like only like an hour and a half type of movie as well. It's only an hour and a half movie, but it just felt a little bit slow and a little bit boring in some places, and it dragged a little bit. And I think with a big focus on the mystery, it wasn't necessarily satisfying how it all played out. Not a bad movie, just not great, is what I'd say. So not quite on the shelf, but I appreciate it for what it is, and I appreciate it for what it did for the time as well.
Yeah, I think actually the kind of the lameness of the mystery or how basic it is. And I'm not sure if that was the case in 1988, but like I've seen the story about the psychic and them being experimented on and all of that. A lot of it is kind of familiar pieces, but I'm not sure if they predate this movie. But actually, kind of the kind of the lack of complexity in the mystery itself kind of enhances the rewatchability for me, because I can just follow along where Reiko is at mentally and emotionally, and that by itself is kind of what carries the movie, in my opinion. And it's not like it's like I think the problem with a mystery is it rewatchable after you know what the answer is? And here, there's not that much of an answer, or the answer is kind of not the point. And for that reason, it makes it more rewatchable, because it's not about that. If it was about that, then you would watch it once, and once you know the answer, there's no reason to watch it again.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with that, because I feel like, a movie like Shutter Island, which we watch, where when you know the mystery of it at the end of it, it really enhances the rewatchability of it, because you then kind of pick up on clues and like subtleties that they interjected.
Yeah, in Shutter Island, it's fun to watch the clockwork go, right? Like the entire machinery. And you're right, it's a different movie when you watch it for the second time. I'm not saying a good mystery necessarily makes it unrewatchable, but I do think the mystery not being the point. It's just I've seen so many stories where you get strung along with a mystery for however many seasons or whatever it is. And then you know the answer. And once you know the answer, there's no point in watching again. Because it all just feeds to this one big reveal, and it's not much else to it. I do think there's other stuff here, which like specifically the things we've talked about.
Fair. Well, all right, guys. I guess with that, we reached the end of today's episode. If you reach this far in the episode, of course, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you pressing play anytime you do press play on any of our podcasts. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, I've got a tip for you to see. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Next episode in 7 days.
That's a good one.